Good evening, everybody. It is May 20th, and I just got back from an 11-day trip to Australia. The weather at home was gorgeous and sunny and warm while I was away, and during that time, my tomatoes have grown completely out of control. So I'm going to take this as an opportunity to make a little tutorial video on how to single stem prune your tomato plants up against stakes. Now, last year, I trellised my tomatoes on a very large trellis, and I'll link to the video above because I made a very in-depth video on how to trellis your tomatoes. But this is a very different situation because when you grow using a tomato stake, you want to single stem your tomatoes. When you use a trellis, you can use either one or two main stems, and the reason why is the trellis will support the tomato in all different directions. But when you grow against a stake like this, you really want just one main stem, and I will show you exactly what I'm talking about here. Okay, this is an example of a tomato that I pruned to one single stem. You can see it starts here at the top, and then it goes down, follows a single main stem consistently all the way to the bottom. Here's the where the stem meets the ground, and if you follow it all the way up, it never branches off. That same stem twists around that tomato stake. While I was away, this tomato right here formed a double stem and went completely bananas. Here you can see the main stem. Here you can see where the main stem was, but over here it branched off, made these huge fruit clusters, and I'm telling you, none of this existed when I left 12 days ago. This is all 12 days worth of growth. It's crazy. So I'm going to show you how to cut this down into a single main stem, because a tomato stake cannot support a tomato plant like this. You would need a trellis to keep a double stem like this. Now, before we begin, there are a few principles to pruning that you need to know. Now, a tomato plant will sucker. This is an example of a sucker right here, in between a main stem and a leaf. They'll sucker out at a 45-degree angle, and each sucker can turn into an individual main stem. So you can basically have a limitless number of main stems. I strongly recommend limiting your tomato plant to 2 main stems at the most, no matter what. And the reason why is your roots are only so large. So the more main stems you have, the more fruit clusters you will have, the smaller and less desirable the fruit will be, the slower they will be to ripen. Because your root system can only support so much growth on your tomato plant. But if you do decide to grow 2 main stems, you're really going to need to trellis your tomato, or you're going to wind up with this mess. You're going to leave for a few days, and your plant is going to it's going to spider in 2 different directions, and then the worst thing will happen, like this one. It will completely split in half under the weight of the fruit from the second main stem. So this is kind of the mess that I'm coming home to after being away for almost 2 weeks. So you'll need a trellis if you really want 2 main stems. If you grow along a tomato stake, you have to limit yourself to 1, or you're not going to be able to appropriately stake and support your tomato, and you'll have fruits breaking and falling over, just like that example that I just showed you. So you're going to need 2 tools in order to prune and stake up your tomato plants, aside from the tomato plant and the stake itself. One is a clean pair of shears. They have to be clean. You have to sanitize them. I wash this in hot soapy water with dish soap. Another alternative would be to spray them down with alcohol or hydrogen peroxide, but you want them to be sterilized because you don't want to spread disease, and when you cut into your tomatoes, any kind of bacteria or funguses that are on the blades, you're basically injecting them into your plant. The second thing that you need is a method of tying your tomatoes to your stake or trellis or whatever you're going to use. You can use twine, you can use twist ties, you can use old torn up shirts. My favorite thing to use, though, is this vinyl garden tape. And the reason why I like this is because it expands. See this? That will expand until it eventually snaps, but it takes a lot of force to snap. The reason why I recommend the vinyl tape is because it will not constrict the growth of your stems on your tomatoes. If you use a twist tie or twine, they don't really stretch. So as the tomato plant matures, the stems get thicker and thicker, and they actually wind up growing into the twist tie or the twine. And they wind up actually choking off the growth of the plants themselves, and then you have trouble with transpiration, which is the uptake of water from the roots into the tops of the tomato plant. You're basically putting a noose around the tomato. So that won't happen with this vinyl tape because it stretches. So the first thing you want to do is you want to select which tomato stem you want to use as your main stem. Generally, you want to use the thicker, more fruit-laden, stronger stem as your main stem. This stem right here is a good bit closer to the tomato plant, but as you can see, it is the inferior stem. It is thinner and there's not much fruit on it. This one is much more laden with fruit. So even though it'll be harder to tie up, this is the one we want to go with. It's thicker, it's more vigorous, it's holding on to its flower clusters better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie this off very carefully to my tomato stake, and then I'm going to prune this stem off, leaving only the fruit clusters, and I'll show you how to do that. Now what you want to do here is you want to make very close contact with the tomato stake, but you don't necessarily need to touch the vine to the tomato stake. That's not really necessary. What I want to do is I want to put a little loop through this main stem so it holds it in a secure fashion and it doesn't go flying. And again, you can do this because this is stretchable tape. Then you want to just pull it to within about an inch or two of the tomato stake, just to loosely secure it. And you do not want your fruit to touch the stake if at all possible, because as the fruit swells, it will start making contact with the stake. You want to try to keep it off to the side. So now my main stem is supported. So this stem right here is now becoming a major liability. So what I have here is I have a fruit cluster dangling here. I have a fruit cluster dangling here, if you can see that. I want to save that. I also have a nice little cluster of fruit that's forming right here. So I'm going to try to save them. So I'm going to lop off the stem right there. All this is just green growth that the root system can't really support and make the fruits big enough anyway. If you look, this is a hybrid tomato. It's a steak sandwich hybrid, so that's why it is so heavily laden with fruit. It's really bred for production, and this variety happens to taste good from Burpee as well. So I'm going to prune off the suckers. I'm going to prune off any low growth right here. The first thing you always want to do is remove the growth on the up to the first fruit cluster, because water splashes the bottom of the soil and it will coat the underside of your leaves with mud, and that mud carries viruses and bacteria, and that's where you usually get your blight and your leaf spot from. So make sure you prune them off. Then I'm going to prune off any leaves that are sticking back here, because I want to keep all airflow back here in the center. Airflow will keep the disease away from your plants as long as possible by keeping the leaves dry. The more airflow that your plants have, the drier the leaves will stay, the less disease you'll get. The other thing I want to do is I want to do a quick sucker check and pull off these little suckers right here that are growing all over the place, because they're going to form more main stems and suck the energy from my plant and put it into producing more foliage instead of larger fruit that ripens more quickly. So this was a pretty easy prune job because I've been maintaining my plant pretty well. There's just a few more suckers up here that I really want to take off. See that guy right there? You want to take that guy off, because that will turn into another big heavy main stem that just sucks a lot of energy from your plant. Pull off this little sucker right here. No need for that. Get rid of that. And then you'll see right here I have this extra, what used to be the second main stem. This needs support, because as this fruit cluster grows and as this fruit cluster grows, it's going to put more and more downward momentum pulling down on the plant, and I'm going to get splitting at the union right here, right behind this fruit right here, if you can see it, where the initial suckering took place. So I have to tie this up really well. or else I'm going to get another split like the tomato plant I just showed you, where the fruits are lying on the ground. And that would not be good. That would not make anybody happy. So let's tie that off and just pull it into the stake just a little bit. And now that will give this branch, or this main stem rather, this stem, adequate support for the time being. This will probably give me about 7 days worth of added support. So what's going to happen is these fruits are going to get bigger and bigger, especially up here, and they're going to pull more and more down on the plant, and I'm eventually going to have to add a tie up here as well to kind of minimize that fulcrum effect. It's going to try and split the this stem. So you're going to have to keep adding ties. So this is an example of a plant that was pretty out of control, that really got away from me while I was away. I'm going to take that leaf off as well because it's pointing in the back. I'm going to show you a more normal plant as to how you will routinely prune your plants, and hopefully you won't be away for almost 2 weeks like me and they won't get so out of control on you. Okay, this is a plant that is going to be more of a routine pruning. It hasn't gotten away from me just yet, but it will if I let it go too much further. Follow the original stem out of the ground, and you will see as you come up, you'll get a good sized sucker here. We're going to pull that right off, get rid of that guy because that's useless and it'll just suck energy. And then at this fruit cluster right here, what will be a fruit cluster, you will see I'm starting to get another sucker here. So look at these two suckers. What you want to do is you want to spare the stronger sucker. And if you ask me, here we have a nice flower cluster that is starting to set fruit. You can see the flowers starting to dry up. Hopefully they will all be tomatoes. You see another flower cluster starting up there. You also notice the diameter of this stem is bigger than the diameter of this stem. So this is going to be the stem that we remove, and all we're going to do is we're going to take our clippers and we are going to decapitate this big sucker that would be a problem if we let it go too much further. We're also going to pull off any of these little suckers that are forming along the way. Here's another sucker, and we're going to have to cut that guy off. And any branches that are sticking out into the center. Remember, this is my alley that I want to maintain airflow through, so I'm also going to cut off this branch right here. And we're going to take a look at any of these branches down here. Anything that may be too low, we're going to lop off as well. And I'm going to take off this branch right here because it just looks a little bit too low for me. And that guy is going to go. The last thing we are going to do is we are going to apply another tie and get this really close to the stake, but we're going to try and offset it just a little bit so when this fruit eventually forms, it won't be compressing against the stake. So I'll show you how I'll do that now. We are going to wrap our vinyl tape right underneath a leaf node, and we're just going to try to pull it reasonably close to the stake. Keep it around an inch or so away. That way it'll give it some support, but it won't push the plant too far uncomfortably against the stake. I'm also going to add another one up here, and the reason why is I want this flower cluster to set tomatoes out in this direction. I do not want that flower cluster to be confined into here because the tomatoes are going to grow, they're going to swell up, and they may break that flower cluster off as they try to push in this direction. That's a no-no. So we're going to add one more tie right there. So this is really just a lot of common sense stuff, but it's common sense stuff that you really have to think about. When you hear somebody say it, you'll say, "Oh, that's a really great idea. Why didn't I think of that?" Or, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense." But you may not necessarily think about it because it's not something that most people do every single day. So you just kind of have to figure it out as you go along. The last thing that you want to do with any pruning project is you want to remove any damaged or diseased leaves And if you look right here, I have a little spot right here. I'm not entirely sure that that is disease. It doesn't look like disease. It could just be sun damage. It could be from fertilizer. It could be from a lot of different things, some kind of overabundance of nutrition, or maybe I need to fertilize. But it's generally a good idea to remove leaves that look like this, because if it is some kind of disease, you want to remove it before it spreads. What is very important is you do all of your disease pruning at the very end, because you don't want to make a lot of pruning with shears that have touched diseased leaves, because you could spread that disease. It's even a good idea to clean your shears off in between pruning each plant. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that, because it just doesn't look good, and it's probably nothing at this point in the year, but it's just a good idea to try and remove all of the funny looking leaves, just to ensure that you don't have a disease problem early in your garden. Alright, so I just finished pruning up my tomatoes. You'll see I removed all of the leaves that were sticking out this way and this way, so now I have a nice straight shot right over to my eggplant. You can see them clearly in cages back there, and you can kind of see the cucumber growing along the trellis. It's actually a pickling cucumber. So that straight shot will maximize airflow and really help keep disease pressure down in my hot, humid, summery climate here in coastal southeastern North Carolina. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you find this video helpful. As I said before, I really recommend you check out the other video that I made on pruning last year, because it goes into a lot of detail as to different methods of stemming your tomato plants and using trellises. So between this video with tomato stakes and that video with trellises, that should give you a really good primer on how to prune your tomatoes for maximum productivity, disease resistance, and good size, healthy fruits. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel for future updates. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you all again next time.